What is up, you guys? Happy 4th of July. In honor of the 4th of July, got the guns out. I'm doing a controversial thoughts video on the 4th of July because this is what I do. I was thinking about some stuff, want to talk about this. Recently, I've been talking a lot about polyunsaturated vegetable oils. Let's just say polyunsaturated fats to be more specific. And I've been talking a lot about linoleic acid, an 18-carbon omega-6 fatty acid. People have been saying, what about fish oil? What about omega-3? Is that different? And in some ways it is, and in some ways it's not. So I want to break that down a little bit in this video today and talk about my thoughts omega-6 versus omega-3 and go from there. So I want to start with a study that I shared the other day looking at mice. Again, mice are not humans. Nobody's claiming they are. But in some of these systems, they're the best we've got, and we can use models of polyunsaturated damage to perhaps suggest surrogate endpoints in humans. So this is the study that I was talking about the other day, and the title of the study is Dietary Linoleic Acid is Required for Development of Experimentally Induced Alcoholic Liver Injury. If you remember, they fed the mice a number of higher fat diets, 25% calories as fat, or perhaps this is just their normal amount as fat, and they gave the mice a bunch of ethanol. They gave the mice a bunch of alcohol, knowing that this would induce liver injury. They either fed them tallow as 0.7% linoleic acid, lard as 2.5% linoleic acid, or tallow supplemented with linoleic acid at 2.5%. Remember that lard is from pigs, and this kind of goes back to one of the things I was talking about earlier when I was saying that fat from pork is going to be much higher in linoleic acid than fat from ruminants. You can listen to the previous controversial thoughts video if you want to hear about that kind of stuff, but the takeaway was that a lot of us might be getting excess amounts of polyunsaturated fatty acids, specifically omega-6 linoleic acid, if we're eating a lot of chicken and pork that's fed soy and corn. It's just something we can't ignore, and we want to make sure that we're eliminating as much of that as possible if we're not at the place that we want to be metabolically. And if we believe that we're at the place that we want to be metabolically, that's great, but it's often important to test that. And at the end of this video, I'll talk about how you can test your fatty acids and stuff like that. So back to this paper. You'll see that what happened here was that when they gave the rats more of the linoleic acid, they had histologic changes in the tallow linoleic acid ethanol fed rats, and it was more severe than the lard ethanol group, but both of those groups still had the changes. The tallow ethanol group did actually not show any evidence of liver injury, which is pretty interesting. Suggesting, like they say, that linoleic acid is essential for the development of alcoholic liver disease in a rat. And I thought that was really interesting that when you had that development, you could essentially show that if you just fed the rat tallow and alcohol, you would not see any problems. Now, in a previous controversial thoughts video, I also showed this study, which looked at dietary linoleic acid in a mouse model affecting 2-AG and anandamide and inducing obesity. What's interesting about this one is that when they gave the linoleic acid with EPA, which is an omega-3 fatty acid, the effects seem to be blunted or abrogated, right? So the adipogenic effect of linoleic acid can be prevented by consuming sufficient EPA and DHA to reduce the arachidonic acid as AA, phospholipid pool, and normalize endocannabinoid tone. So what's interesting about this paper, at least in mice, is it's suggesting that linoleic acid imbalanced by omega-3s, meaning that excess omega-6 in the form of linoleic acid, can cause overeating by causing overproduction of anandamide and 2-AG, which are endocannabinoids, which can induce some appetite in mice and make them fat. And along with the fat, they're probably going to get more insulin resistant, and I believe that they did measure that in the studies. But that can be abrogated somewhat if you balance it with omega-3. So what we originally see here, what we start to see here is there's a difference in the physiology between omega-3 and omega-6. And indeed, I think it's important to point out this omega-3 to omega-6 ratio is important. I've talked about it on previous podcasts with Ivor Cummins, and I think that one of the reasons that we find that omega-3 supplementation may be valuable in some humans is that they have so much linoleic acid to begin with. That could be part of the problem. So is part of the problem with linoleic acid the fact that it's not balanced with an omega-3? Does that mean we can just take tons of omega-3 to balance out all the omega-6 we're eating? I don't think so, and I'll show you why. So in this study, you will see that when people supplement with omega-3 in humans, you actually do begin to see increased oxidation of the fats measured by malondialdehyde and lipid peroxides. These are two things I've talked about in the past. What they did was they gave these people menhaden oil, 6.26 grams of omega-3 fatty acids, or olive oil supplements with either vitamin E or placebo. And at the end, they found that in those supplemented with omega-3 fatty acids, EPA and DHA increased in plasma phospholipids, and plasma malondialdehyde and lipid peroxides increased with a very high degree of statistical significance, with very low p-values. They said in summary, in conclusion, the results demonstrate that supplementing the diet with omega-3 fatty acids resulted in an increase in lipid peroxidation as measured by plasma MDA and lipid peroxide products, which was not suppressed by vitamin E supplementation. So where does this leave us? Well, I think that it suggests that if you are thinking about metabolic health, balancing omega-6 with omega-3 is important. Getting reasonable amounts of omega-3 to complement your omega-6 is important. As I've stated in previous videos, I think evolutionarily we would have had very low levels of omega-6 in our diet, which would have made getting enough omega-3 to balance it very easy, and something that would have occurred in a moderate amount of egg yolks, if we could find them, or probably even just what's in ruminant animal fat, like suet. Has omega-3, it has omega-6, they're in reasonable ratios, and I think that ratio is probably enough for humans to maintain metabolic health. The problem that I think we run into with fish oil supplementation is that it gives us, our body, tons of these polyunsaturated fatty acids that it has to protect from oxidation. And so we might be sacrificing oxidative stress for metabolic health when we could have just corrected that in the first place by not overeating linoleic acid. We wouldn't need tons of fish oil. Again, this is yet another place where I disagree strongly with Rhonda Patrick. I think we just need to have a thumb wrestling match and just be done with it. We can talk about sulforaphane, we can talk about new 5-GC, and we can talk about the need in humans for fish oil. I think if you're eating a reasonable amount of linoleic acid and not eating foods that are enriched in that, you don't need a ton of omega-3 fatty acids. But let's look at a couple other studies that make this really interesting. So this is one where you actually see a benefit to fatty fish. So this is not fish oil, this is fatty fish. And so they're saying that it increases insulin sensitivity when compared to a red meat diet in young iron deficient women. And I thought, oh, isn't that interesting? Here is fish oil in the form of fish, a polyunsaturated fatty acid, improving insulin sensitivity, which is measured by, they calculate it by the HOMA-IR, the HOMA score, which is calculated, and the quantitative insulin sensitivity check index, which they show you how to calculate in this paper. But when I dug more into this paper, what I realized was that at baseline, all of the women in this paper had a huge amount of polyunsaturated fatty acids in their diet. So if you look here, this is the micro and macronutrient intake of volunteers during the oily fish and red meat diets, 4 persons per week. First month, second month of the diet. Here's the red meat diet. Here's the oily fish diet. But look at this. In the red meat diet, not red fish, in the red meat diet, they had 10.7% of their calories, 10.7% of their fats from omega-3, from omega-6, specifically from linoleic acid. They had 10.8 from omega-6. In the second month, they went up even higher. They had 11.6% of their fat from linoleic acid. That's just not evolutionarily consistent. Here, in the other women, these are the women who had the oily fish diet, they had 10.6% of their fats from linoleic acid. They went up to 12.3, but as you can see here, they increased their N3 PUFA, the omega-3s, to 2.6 and then 3.0. And so I think what's going on here is that when you have a huge amount of linoleic acid in your diet, you'll see that if you push a bunch of PUFA in there, in this case in the form of real food, not a fish oil supplement, you may see improvements in insulin sensitivity. But what I fear you will also see, if you do this, by increasing your overall percentage of polyunsaturated fat, is more lipid peroxidation. And you could solve this problem by not having such a high level of omega-6 fatty acids in your diet in the beginning. You don't need a ton of omega-3 if you have an evolutionarily consistent amount of omega-6 in your diet. So this really starts to put things in perspective, right? And we can think about how to move forward from this in the best way. Just so that everyone understands what I'm talking about here, I want to go over some of these molecules because this gets a little confusing. So let's talk about this. Linoleic acid is an omega-6 polyunsaturated fatty acid, which means the first double bond is 6 carbons from the end of the molecule, It has 2 double bonds here at the 9 and 12 position, and it is omega-6 polyunsaturated. The question that I often get is, what about conjugated linoleic acid? It's a different molecule. So conjugated linoleic acid looks like this. And the reason it looks like this is because this is specifically rumenic acid. As good old Wikipedia says here, they are conjugated linoleic acids are a family of 28 isomers of linoleic acid, mostly found in meat and dairy products derived from ruminants. Their 2 double bonds are conjugated, which means they're separated by a single bond, and they can either be cis or trans, which gets us into another challenging bit of terminology that I'll go over in a moment. But you can see here, this molecule looks different because of the way it's kinked. It's kinked like that because these bonds are cis instead of trans. So what do I mean cis and trans? It has to do with this concept that when you have a double bond in a molecule, in a fat molecule, which is a string of carbons, these hydrogens can't rotate freely around the single bond. So that means that it's stuck. And when you have hydrogens on opposite sides, you have trans. When you have hydrogens on the same side, you have cis. When you have cis, you're going to get a kink in this molecule. Now, hydrogenated vegetable oil usually makes trans fats like this, and they take saturated fats and make it trans fat by putting a whole bunch of hydrogen and heat and oxygen and making it very reactive. We know that hydrogenated vegetable oils, trans fats from vegetable oils, are pretty bad in humans. What's interesting is that conjugated linoleic acid can have some isomers that are actually trans fats, but these don't look like they're quite as bad in humans at all. So the molecule is very important to look at. Here's another example of cis and trans. Here's an 18-carbon fatty acid. This is stearic acid, one of the molecules I've been talking a lot about recently. The saturated fat, no double bonds. Here is an unsaturated 18-carbon molecule, which we know as oleic acid. And because this bond here is cis, it gets a kink in the molecule. Here's a trans fat, 18-carbon trans fat, just like oleic acid, but these carbons are trans. This is a lytic acid. And this one is associated with junk food because usually you don't get this 18-carbon monounsaturated trans fat unless you're eating trans fat in junk food, some sort of a hydrogenated oil. So you can see that it looks straight because these carbons are trans, meaning the molecule doesn't have to kink like this. So if we go back to conjugated linoleic acid, you can see there's 2 kinks in this molecule. Kink, kink. These are cis bonds, right? It's rumenic acid. It could be trans. There's some of these that are trans, but these trans fats that occur in conjugated linoleic acid don't seem to be bad for humans. The bonds in conjugated linoleic acid are also at slightly different positions than they are in linoleic acid. So don't confuse conjugated linoleic acid with linoleic acid. They're both 18-carbon polyunsaturated fatty acids that have 2 double bonds, but the position of those double bonds matters a lot. And as we will see, the position of those double bonds makes a big difference when it comes to the actual activities within the human body. So that is what's going on with cis and trans. And that is what's going on with many of these other molecules that we're thinking about that people may be confused about. So when you are thinking about polyunsaturated fatty acids, you want to think about 2 things. You want to think about how much omega-6 linoleic acid am I getting in my diet? And I think that most of the research evolutionarily would say you want to be around 3% linoleic acid in your diet. A whole lot more than that isn't very evolutionarily consistent, and my suspicion, my hypothesis, is that excess amounts of linoleic acid create metabolic havoc and are probably the main factor driving insulin resistance. You've heard me say this. Listen to my previous controversial thoughts videos if this is new information for you. It's also stuff that I talk about in my book, The Carnivore Code. The 2nd edition is coming out August the 4th, thecarnivorecodebook.com. Going to be doing lots of podcasts about this stuff soon. It's super interesting. Okay, so how much linoleic acid are you getting in your diet? From all sources. Add it up from chicken, add it up from pork. You better not be eating vegetable oils. If you are, I'm going to come to your house and knock it out of your hands. Don't eat those vegetable oils, but realize it can be from other sources too. Secondly, you want to think about how much omega-6 you're getting and a reasonable ratio. What's a reasonable ratio? We don't really know for sure, but I think the amount of omega-3, specifically EPA and DHA, if you've read my book, you'll know that alpha-linolenic acid doesn't really convert well to EPA and DHA. It's not used in human biology, so that's basically a worthless precursor. So get EPA and DHA from egg yolks occasionally, or you'll get it from grass-fed ruminant meat, and you get it from grass-fed ruminant fat. You get it from suet, you get it from bone marrow. There's plenty of it there. I think if you're eating low amounts of linoleic acid, you don't have to worry about supplementing with omega-3s. The other point of this video is to say, don't over-supplement with omega-3s, because as you saw in the first study I showed, that can cause excess lipid peroxidation. You don't want that. You don't need that if you don't have a ton of linoleic acid. But as we saw in the red meat versus the oily fish study, if you have a ton of linoleic acid in your diet, your metabolism is going to be broken no matter what. You can add a bunch of oily fish, but then you're probably going to get more lipid peroxides. Not a good play either. Those women are all eating what must be a standard American diet. They have tons of linoleic acid, way too much, which is exactly what I've been talking about from the beginning. Know how much linoleic acid is in your diet. I think this is the real enemy, not fructose, not sugar. I'm not saying go out and eat a whole bunch of sugar. It's July the 4th. Don't go out and eat cotton candy. That has zero nutritional value. But know your enemy. Know what the main thing you need to worry about is, and don't stress the other things. If you want to have a piece of watermelon on July the 4th, it's probably fine. In fact, if you read my book, you know that fruit is totally reasonable in a tier 1 carnivore diet. I think our ancestors often ate meat and fruit when it was in season. July the 4th, it's watermelon season. It's reasonable. I want to show one more study, which is actually pretty darn striking. This is looking at soybean oil and the hypothalamus of mice. So again, it's mice, but this is such a striking study showing that soybean oil, which is very high in linoleic acid, basically pisses on the campfire of the hypothalamus, really messes up the biology of the hypothalamus in many ways. So the two soybean oil diets had similar, albeit non-identical, effects on the hypothalamic transcriptome, whereas the coconut oil diet had a negligible effect compared to a low-fat diet. Dysregulated genes were associated with inflammation, neuroendocrine, neurochemical, and insulin signaling. Is that what you want going on with your hypothalamus? Do we really wonder why Americans are obese and inflamed when they're eating a soybean oil like this? What's so interesting about this, again, this is in mice, but at the end, they looked at whether stigmatosterol, which is a phytosterol in soybean oil, is causing the problem, or linoleic acid. Now, I think that what they found was that it wasn't stigmatosterol. I don't know why they come to the conclusion it's not linoleic acid, because that's pretty clearly what's going on here for me. But they said that it's not the phytosterols that are doing this. I think it's reasonable to suggest that something about soybean oil, probably the excess linoleic acid in that diet, in that oil, is causing the hypothalamus to be dysregulated. And most of you will know that your endogenous hunger cues come from the hypothalamus. Look at the first or second study I showed, looking at mice, 2-AG, and anandamide, which are those obesogenic cannabinoids, which come from the brain as well. Vegetable oils are breaking our satiety. You want to know how much linoleic acid is in your diet, what percentage. You want to get that to a reasonable level. In my opinion, the ideal would be less than 3%. And then I think if you're doing that and you're eating animal foods, you'll get plenty of omega-3. I don't think you have to worry about omega-3 in the same way that you have to worry about omega-6. Start with omega-6, make it 3% of your diet, thereabouts. Get rid of the junk foods that have high amounts. Think about the corn, soy-fed chicken and pork that might be enriching it in your diet. Do the calculations, and then don't worry about omega-3, because if you're eating grass-fed ruminant animals, you'll get plenty of omega-3. Even grain-fed ruminant animals will have omega-3. You'll get enough. You'll be fine metabolically. You'll be healthy. It's only in people who have enriched really high levels of linoleic acid that the omega-3 supplementation might be useful. But again, that's probably going to cause more lipid peroxidation. So wrapping it full circle, hopefully that makes sense to you guys. That's my answer to the omega-3 question. Don't supplement with fish oil. Know where it's coming from in your diet. Don't overdo the omega-6s, and what's coming from your diet normally will be plenty of omega-3s. Don't fear conjugated linoleic acid at all. And pivoting to something that's completely unrelated, I don't know if you guys have ever seen this, but I thought this was pretty cool. There is so much misinformation out there, a coronavirus, about politics. I don't get into politics. None of this is partisan. I just want people to be healthy. If you haven't seen this media bias chart, this is fascinating. Left, right, original fact reporting, content's inaccurate, or fabricated info. As you go up and to the middle, things are more in the middle and they're more reliable. As you go down, they're less reliable. What's down here? Inquirer, World Truth TV, News Punch, Infomax, all this kind of stuff down here. Super conservative over here, super liberal, right? Occupy Democrats. I don't even know what's over here. MSNBC, Slate. You know, you go up in the middle, what do you see? You see NBC, CBS, Bloomberg, NPR, AP Reuters, The Economist, CNN's kind of on the left side, Wall Street Journal's kind of on the right, but mostly in the middle. I'll let you guys decide, but I thought it was cool. If you want unbiased news, you would definitely want to be getting your news from something in here and not down here or down here. So again, this is not political, but I think truth is important. That was fascinating that someone had actually quantified how different news networks can be biased. This is probably no news to any of you. All right, thanks for watching this one. Hopefully that makes sense with omega-3s. Check out my book, The Carnivore Code, thecarnivorecodebook.com. Got a podcast coming on Tuesday with John Venus, ex-vegan who is eating meat now. We're going to talk about why he did that, what he was experiencing before, and we're going to break down a lot of the studies that people use to substantiate a vegan diet and talk about why they could be better. So stay radical, you guys. Happy July the 4th. Love you all.